Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Home 2022-2023 NOFA Program Activities Native American Entity Application Workshop and Webinar. We are recording this event and we will be posting the live recording and our PowerPoint presentation on our HCD website a few days after this presentation. I'd also like to remind everybody that we are going to only navigate our questions through this session through the question and answer tab that is located along your selection bar. It's either at the top or the bottom of your Zoom meeting. You just click on the question and answer box, enter your question in there, and we will address your questions live during this presentation. We will not be taking verbal questions during this presentation. Next slide. So my name is Nicolay McKay, and I'm the section chief for the home program. I've been with the department for 18 years, and most of my tenure here at HCD has been involved in the home program or other federal programs that are operated by the department. In addition to that, I have 7 years of experience working for a nonprofit developer that access both home funds and state Cal Home funds. I'd now like to turn over the rest of the introductions to Jay Cortez, who is the Program Activities Manager for my home team. Jay, take it away.
Thank you, Nikki. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us and learn about the home program and specifically home program activities. We'll tell you what that looks like in detail, but I wanted to just start by introducing myself. I'm the Home Program Activities Manager. I've been in this role for 4.5 years, and I've been in home programs for since March of 2007, so about 17 years. With us today are 4 of the 5 reps that we have listed here. Tony couldn't make it today to the office, so we have Vicky Belanco. You see her on camera, Jamie Gonzalez, Paul Monson, and Selena Castilleja. We call her Cece. And there is a state reps map on our website that would tell you whom your rep would be should you be awarded, or even should you have any questions based on the county in which you're located. So that's on our home page. And so we're just pleased to be with you and hope that you get a lot out of this workshop, and that ultimately this leads to us receiving some NOFA applications from at least some of you. So thank you for joining us, and let's keep going. Now I'd like to turn it over to our CAP team, and go ahead, Mary. I think you were the one who was going to speak.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Hi, everybody. My name is Mary. I'm the tribal liaison here with the department. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the home programs team. We also have Amy Lopez here and Zach. And Zach is going to say a few words about the CAP program.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary, and thank you to Nikki and Jay and the rest of the home team for having us here. And thank you to all of you for being here today and learning a little bit more about this program. My name is Zach. I'm a specialist on our CAP, or California Indian Assistance Program Tribal Affairs team here at HCD. And what myself and Mary and Amy and a couple others do is work towards the implementation of a law called AB 1010, which passed in 2019. And basically establishes that here at HCD, we have to do certain work to really incorporate and make these programs that we are operating accessible for tribes. And so what we do is work both internally with our program staff to kind of identify and modify programs where they need to be, but then to also work with tribes and tribal applicants and folks from tribal communities trying to access these programs to kind of bridge certain gaps and kind of come together and make these programs a lot more accessible for everyone, tribes especially. So that's what we're here for today, to support the program team. We're happy to be here, excited to be here, and looking forward to this application period kicking off and hopefully partnering with some of y'all to get applications in. And now finally, I want to let Amy Lopez introduce herself as well. So Jay, if you could unmute Amy.
I'm working on it. Or Nikki, maybe you can as co-host, trying to find her on my screen here at the bottom. Can you do that, Nikki? Oh, there.
Amy, you should be unmuted.
Okay. Hi, my name is Amy Lopez. I'm here with the Tribal Affairs team, Housing Policy Analyst. It's good to be here this afternoon with you all.
Okay.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. Well, thank you, COP team, and let's just keep going. We've got a lot to get through today. So remember, please, to put your questions into the Q&A, and at various breaks, we're going to address each of the questions, either directly answer it or tell you that we need to check it out and get back to you. So Nikki is going to now launch a little poll just to get a sense of who's attending and your level of experience with what we're talking about today. So there's the poll. And what I'll do is I'll put it in, I think this works, and I think everybody can see as it's being filled out, what kind of results are compiling. So we're going to give this probably a good couple of minutes easily to let you put in your answers if you're willing to. I left city and county in there in case by chance somebody was attending from a city or county, perhaps accidentally, or perhaps in conjunction somehow with a tribal entity. So I decided not to remove that. So it looks like about half of you have answered these questions. I believe this applies only to the our guests. So now 7 out of 10 of you, great. And we're just over a minute into it, so this is good. I will give it another 30 seconds to give people enough time to put in their answers. And then we'll look at the results. Five seconds left. All right. And so I will actually not even click on end poll because I'm kind of sharing the results with you live here. So I'll do it that way. So what we found is that separately somewhere there's answers to who's here, and we'll look at that later. And then so 1 out of 8 of you is a developer. 3 out of 8 of you are a Native American entity. 2 out of 8 of you are consultants of some sort, and then 4 out of 8 of you are something else, which that's the results. And so the years of experience with the home program, and so 6 out of 8 say less than 1 year, and 2 out of 8 say 1 to 3 years. Okay. Years of experience with rental assistance, not necessarily home. So less than a year is 60% of you, and 3 to 5 years, 40% of you. Years of experience with single family housing rehab and or down payment assistance. Again, 4 out of 5 have less than 1 year, and 1 out of 5 has 3 to 5 years. So I'll stop sharing that poll. Thank you for contributing. That gives us a better sense of who's here and what we can do for you. So I'll close that. Bear with us. This is our first year of doing running our own Zoom meetings, so we will stumble at times. Thank you for your patience. So here's today's agenda. I'm not going to read every shred of this, but the bold parts, program overview, then we'll do program requirements part 1 and then part 2, and then we'll do application scoring and evaluation, and then a little wrap up. So let's first talk about NOFA application deadlines. And so the application submittal period, and this has been extended by an extra month for tribal entities for your, what we call solicitation in eCivis, is May 9th. So we're going to, I think it's not going to release until February 14th rather than we had planned on the 12th. I'm not sure if the 12th can happen. Pretty sure the 14th can. So just think of Valentine's Day. That's an easy way to remember it, through May 9th. So tribal entities get a whole extra month, 30 days beyond non-tribal applicants. And non-tribal applicants have a whole separate solicitation from us with its own built-in deadlines in eCivis. So this NOFA offers roughly $7.25 million in home funds for the program activities tribal target. Okay, that's just by formula. You're basically, you know, it's 20% of our 40% of the big pot, more or less. And so our program is meant to serve low-income households earning, it must serve low-income households earning at or below 80% AMI. So what's AMI? That's an acronym that stands for Area Median Income. And so that's the home final rule, federal rule, that nobody can be served over that limit. Very low income households can also be served, and that by definition is 50% AMI or below. And so home exists to increase the supply of affordable housing, and that would be on our kind of rental development side or subdivision. That's how you increase the supply. It's also to expand home ownership opportunities, so that would look like down payment assistance, and improve existing housing, so that's owner-occupied rehabilitation. The one that I accidentally left off this slide is also it helps renters have affordable rents by filling the gap between what we feel they can afford and what it costs to rent a unit. So I mentioned eCivis, so that's the electronic application portal. It's just a website. Here's the link to the website. This link is also, all these links are on our home page. You can see our home page. It would be a bit to type in at the bottom of the this slide, that URL. The easier way would just be to go to hcd.ca.gov. You don't even have to type in the HTTP stuff. And then just using your hover on the kind of top left side of the page, you would see like programs active, and you'd find the home program. And don't confuse that, please, with the home ARP program. Same kind of name, theirs is extended, and it's a whole different thing. So find home investment partnerships program, that's us. And so on that page, you would click on NOFA, because this is a NOFA webinar after all, and you would find under that the NOFA, some appendices, and these links to your eCivis where you would go in to apply, or even just think about applying, looking at our forms, etc., exploring it, and the system user manual and the external web, and a recorded external user webinar from the past that's still handy. We keep that accessible to you. So you can start accessing those applications using that link. It's not going to do you any good until probably February 14th. Right now, you would see something that says home in there, but it would be for program income projects for state recipients who've received payments or paybacks from old home loans that they had done. That's not what you're after. Some important things to know. So if you're going to engage in first-time homebuyer programs, there is homebuyer education training that's mandatory by the federal government, and it must be conducted by a HUD certified housing counselor who is employed by a HUD certified housing counseling service. So that link, and you will end up with a copy of this PowerPoint, will get you to that list, and you could find a vendor assuming you don't have that or aren't HUD certified for that in-house, for homebuyer education, and that can be done by distance. As long as there ends up being some sort of individual one-on-one component between the counselor and the household. Also know that if you are exempt from requirements of at 2 CFR Part 200 there, which requires single audit reports for entities that spend $750,000 or more in a given fiscal year in federal funds. If you're exempt, you'll in the eCivis, if you apply, you'll upload a copy of your exemption letter that was sent to the Federal Clearinghouse. That's part of your home application. If you're not, you upload your single audit report instead. So it's one or the other. So let's talk about program requirements, eligible applicants and eligible activities. So let's go over some important definitions here that will be of interest to you. So in our NOFA, it says the following, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to read this slide just because it's important that we all get the terms. So Native American entity means an Indian tribe or a tribally designated housing entity that is any of the following. A, applicant meets the definition of Indian tribe under, I'm just going to say that section of the code. I'm not going to read the code citation to you. You'll get it in your PowerPoint. It's also in the NOFA. This is straight out of the NOFA. So you meet the definition of an Indian tribe, or B, you meet the definition of a tribally designated housing entity under that federal code, or C, if you're not a federally recognized tribe, then you are either one, you've got to be listed in the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Federal Acknowledgement petitioner list at that code citation, or an Indian tribe located in California that is on the contact list maintained by the Native American Heritage Commission for the purposes of consultation pursuant to government code, that section. And 3, has formed and controls a special purpose entity in compliance with that. So notice those are 1 or 2 and 3 in terms of if you're not a federally recognized tribe. Next slide is, so there's another term in the NOFA, Native American Entity dash Federally Recognized Tribe, so NAEFRT for short, means any tribal government which is a federally recognized tribe as defined at that section of the government code and includes a duly constituted governing body of an Indian reservation or rancheria as per the health and safety code sections there, or is a tribally designated housing entity under that government code section. So for short, we might just refer to this as federally recognized tribes just to save some time and breath, if that would be okay. The NOFA also says that Native American entity non-federally recognized tribe, NFRT, means any tribal government which is an Indian tribe located in California that is not a federally recognized tribe and is either 1, listed in the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Federal Acknowledgement and Petitioner List, and has formed and controls a special purpose entity, like the other slide said, in compliance with California Code of Regulations, that section. Okay, so it's either 1, I just read all that, or 2, listed on the contact list maintained by the California Native American Heritage Commission for the purposes of consultation, but also and has formed and controls a special purpose entity. The common denominator is formed and controls a special purpose entity, you'll notice. So that's what a non-federally recognized tribe definition is in our NOFA. Let's just briefly talk about Native American lands, because that's a term that's used in our NOFA, and it means real property located within the state of California that meets the following criteria. Sorry for reading the slides, but this is important stuff. So number 1, it's trust land for which the United States holds title to the tract or interest in trust for the benefit of 1 or more tribes or individual Indians, or is restricted Indian land for which 1 or more tribes or individual Indians hold fee title to the tract or interest, but can alienate or encumber it only with the approval of the United States. And the land may be leased for housing development and residential purposes under federal law. Okay, so that was all under number one, or otherwise, lands outside the jurisdiction of tribal government owned or co-owned by a Native American entity in accordance with that section of the California Code of Regulations. I realize a lot of questions might possibly develop out of this, but we don't have time to go further in the weeds on that. It's just important that you know that the NOFA talks fairly extensively about some important defined terms, and tries to make it as clear as possible whom can apply for what. Speaking of that, for this, and this is important, for this webinar, which is for home program activities, which we haven't really, I don't think, gotten into what that really is yet. We'll talk about that in a minute. Only Native American entities, federally recognized tribes, may apply for this subject matter that we're talking about today for what I call single family program activities, although that includes helping tenants that are in usually multifamily projects. But in other words, non-projects, non-rental development projects, non-development projects, with a little exception. So that's what we're talking about is for this solicitation that we're talking about here in this meeting, this training, it is for federally recognized tribes in the role of as a state recipient. Native American entity, non-federally recognized tribes can apply only as a special purpose entity developer for home funds and for project activities by forming a special purpose entity. So we talked about that. The idea there is that group can apply for home projects, again, multifamily. I'm not sure about subdivision, but at least rental projects. They're eligible for that, but not for the things that we're going to talk about in this session. Native American service area, entity service area, important definition, means the area where the project is located or program is located, in this case, within the Native American lands and includes lands outside the Native American entity tribal government jurisdiction up to 100 miles from the boundary of the NAE trust or restricted land as defined there. That citation, that is within non-entitlement jurisdiction. Another way of saying that is, if you were to apply for home funds, you would need to make sure that what the activity that you're proposing is within 100 miles of the edge of the Native American land, trust land or restricted land. I think the idea there is so that you could service them, reach them, go look at, you have to do unit inspections. Yes, you could kind of outsource some of the work, but still the idea is to operate programs that are within 100 miles of your trust land or restricted land. Cities and counties don't enjoy this latitude. They have to operate strictly within city limits, counties strictly within unincorporated parts of the county, or the whole county if it's tenant-based rental assistance. So this is a bit of latitude. It's a wide service area that's being offered. So it also means that an applicant could not operate a statewide tenant-based rental assistance program based on that 100-mile boundary restriction. Let's talk about the very important and useful AB 1010. AB 1010 is a process. Basically, I think it's a law, but we've turned it into a process that enables tribes to request for HCD to waive or modify program requirements. So as is noted, this cannot affect or waive any state or federal statutes. As a reminder, statutes are kind of the law that they make, and then the regulations kind of give everybody a way of understanding how that plays out in the real world. So regulations they can't violate statutes, but they can further restrict, clarify, and define and things like that. So while we can't do anything at all about state or federal statutes, or we can't do anything under AB 1010 about federal regulations either, what it can do is help us to get around or through state regulations, as in the most applicable ones I can think of, for starters, are the state home as published as federal home regulations. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. The takeaway for this on you is mostly that we can't do a thing about the home final rule, as it's called, which are the home federal regulations under AB 1010. Zach, you came on camera. Did you have a comment you wanted to make? Okay, sorry for putting you on the spot. I just didn't want to ignore you. Okay, so that should be your takeaway. It's about dealing with state regs, and maybe not just the state home regs, but other state regulations are subject to AB 1010 waivers. So for any assistance or support in submitting an AB 1010 waiver, this is extremely important. Please contact the nice people that you saw at the beginning of this slide, of this presentation. So the program team, and then also the California Indian, well, yeah, sorry, us, the program team, but more importantly for AB 1010 waivers, sorry, the nice CAP folks that you met. And I'm pretty sure you have their contact information. If you don't reach out to, then just go ahead and reach out to us and we'll connect you. But I'm pretty sure you are very familiar with each other. Let's talk about a couple other definitions. Local agency means a city and county or duly constituted governing body of an Indian reservation or rancheria, and includes any governmental agency or local public entity. These were more applicable, I think, before we added definitions for NAEs, the two kinds. Local public entity means any county, city and county, like San Francisco, the duly constituted governing body of an Indian reservation or rancheria, tribally designated housing entities, TDHEs, as defined in those sections of the regs. I never like reading regs citations. It does us no good. A redevelopment agency organized pursuant to that part, or a housing authority. So some of this is not pertaining to you, but these are just general definitions in our NOFA that we decided to put in here. So now we're going to get to what are we talking about, Jay? Home program activities. What are they? So the first one is first-time home buyer, and it comes in meant to eliminate the second bullet point. No longer is acquisition with rehabilitation federally permissible. So acquisition only is one kind of first-time home buyer, and that would look like basically down payment assistance, and infill new construction, which is, we'll talk about that on a slide shortly, but it just is talking about building scattered site homes in within an established community. So all of that together, those two flavors of first-time home buyer, there's a second activity we do, which is owner-occupied rehab, and that's helping owner occupants who need rehabilitation of their homes. We'll get into a lot of detail about that in a few minutes. And then the third one is tenant-based rental assistance, and that's simply helping tenants primarily with the monthly housing costs of their rent and non-included utilities. And so we're going to get into that more as well. And you don't have to worry about the fact that CHODOs can't apply for that, community housing development organizations. So now let's talk more detail about first-time home buyer acquisition only. And remember, any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at right before the first break. So first-time home buyer, down payment and closing cost assistance. Your goal here is to fill the gap. So what I'm talking about is your typical borrower not only probably has challenges to have enough money saved up to do the required down payment. For example, I think 3% on certain kinds of conventional mortgages, 3.5% for FHA, et cetera. So that can be a challenge for a lot of people, but usually their need is way beyond whatever 3% of a $300,000 house would be, $9,000. It's more like they simply can't afford a first mortgage that would have a payment. If they had a 97% first mortgage on that house, they could never afford that. It would be 3/4 of their income. So that's where we come into play. You're giving money towards that gap. So that'll pick up down payment and closing costs, but probably a lot more. And the whole effect of that is, and the whole point of it is, look at bullet number 2, your assistance causes the borrower's payment on their first mortgage to be within what we call debt to income ratio minimums and maximums. What does that mean? That means, I'll just use something that's kind of generally accepted. I think most in the housing world, loan officers, lenders, affordable housing advocates would say people can generally afford 25 to, let's say, 35% of their gross income towards their housing costs. Okay, some might say maybe even a little further. The lower you're going on income, the more you would want to be pushing down towards 25%. If you had a wealthy person that's not eligible for a program, they could maybe have a mortgage that chews up more than half of their income because they would still have a lot of disposable income left. So here, the whole point of our program is to get their first mortgage size down. How do we help by doing that? Because your home loan is going to be what's called a silent second. And it's called a silent second because it's fully deferred, which means you loan somebody up to half the money involved in the purchase of the home, and there are no payments on it for 30 years. So now take somebody who needed 300,000 of financing to buy a home, and now you say, well, okay, get $150,000 first and $150,000 home second. It might be more of a first and less a home, but anyway, that's an extreme example. Now your house payment is roughly half of what it would have been if you'd had to get a loan with, that's amortized principal and interest over 30 years. So effectively, it can do as much as cutting the first mortgage in half, effectively doubling the purchasing power for that household. That's the magic and the beauty of the home silent second, the home loan. So you do loan them the money, but there's no payments. And the underwriters for the first mortgage won't count that as monthly debt. So they're just focused on, at that point, the monthly house payment that's going to have to be made to them. Their big worry is they want to make sure that they're getting paid each month and don't have to end up foreclosing. So that's the power of our program and the way we actually give you a calculation worksheet and you plug in the numbers and it shows an acceptable range of home assistance versus first mortgage, which would fit between these debt ratios that will be established and approved by us in your home program guidelines. So we'll get to what those are in a minute. That's what the program's about. The home loan, bullet 3, can't be more than the first mortgage amount. And we no longer, exceptions would be exceptionally rare because there has to be a hard evidence that without that, you couldn't have a feasible program. Another thing to keep in mind with all home assistance is you cannot exceed the home per unit subsidy limits. We'll talk about those in a minute. The home must start out as standard under first-time home buyer. It can't have any health and safety or code issues at escrow close. So if it does have those sorts of concerns and issues, the seller would have to fix those at their expense before the buyer would take ownership of what would at that point be a standard as opposed to a substandard home. Second thing is the home price sales price can't exceed the current home ownership value limit in your county. We haven't yet wrestled with how that looks on tribal trust land. But I can tell you that since this is a federal limit, if you're operating and assisting folks outside of tribal trust land in an adjacent city or county, you will be limited to what the home ownership value limit is in that county. HUD publishes those annually, and it's based on them calculating the 95% median sales price. They go back like 5 years and 500 records if they need to. So sometimes if in a rising market, they have outdated information and they're too low. We have actually ways of dealing with that through a waiver request process that comes with, we offer up to our grantees every time we announce new HUD limits about every roughly June or July. So there's a way around it in non-tribal areas, and we again haven't sorted through the tribal area part. And again, Chodos can't apply for that. Infill new construction is not a popular program. It's a difficult program. It's hard to build acquire land, build a home, and be able to sell it for what it costs you to put it develop it, which is why some of these programmatic rules apply. So this is building homes within built-out neighborhoods. It's not, the idea is not to extend a neighborhood and expand the so-called city limits or, expand the neighborhood, but rather we've all walked by empty lots between homes, and that's not wonderful. And so this program is pretty much meant for, like it said, infill, filling in between existing homes. And maybe there's two empty lots together and you're going to fill in one, but not both, possibly, or both of them. So second bullet point, it has to be scattered sites, and you can't do build more than 4 dwellings within 2,000 feet of one another. And it's due to the Federal Environmental Review rules, that's NEPA. So that would rise to a very, very difficult level of environmental review that I don't think would be justified for doing, let's say, 5 homes in a certain locality that are all within 2,000 feet of each other. I think it's better to just avoid that situation. Thirdly, your application, if you were to apply for this, must document the availability of grant funds or building sites currently owned by you, the applicant, if the costs will exceed the appraised value, which they very likely would. Let's move on to the second of the 3 home activities, program activities. So it's called owner-occupied rehab. The name tells you that it must be owner-occupied. What it doesn't tell you is it has to already be occupied at the time you would commit assistance to the homeowner. There's one exception to that, which is if their home burned down and they're not occupying it clearly, then you can commit to helping them. There is like a 12-month limitation from the time of destruction, so you'd have to be kind of timely about committing funds to them. But it has to be owner-occupied, and it must be occupied as their primary residence, not like a secondary residence or a vacation home. Third, it must start out as a substandard home, federally speaking, to be eligible, and it must end up as a standard home. So the difference is substandard means there's health and safety and/or code violations, whereas standard homes don't have health and safety and/or code violations. This needs to be beyond a water heater strap missing, a missing smoke or carbon monoxide detector or anything like that. It's got to be more than that. A lot of times it has to do with people's roofs or air conditioning, and we'll get into that stuff in a minute. This program is not a home improvement program. It's not a home remodel program. Therefore, it limits general property improvements to 15% of the overall job cost, even considering the owner contributions. If they want to kick in some money, that still counts towards the 15% limit on improvements. So everybody doesn't get new carpet necessarily, or new paint inside and or outside, etc. So most of the work has to be related to dealing with health and safety code violations, weatherization, accessibility for like wheelchairs and grab bars and things to help people with mobility and this sort of thing, or vision or other accommodations. So this is trying to give you a flavor of what owner-occupied rehab is all about. So you would go into it with kind of realistic expectations and understanding. It's we intentionally sprinkle a lot of what we call Home 101 into these trainings, even for folks who've been coming to us year after year, because sometimes it's a good reminder and sometimes it's something they never picked up on. And it's especially valuable for people who haven't been acquainted with us by doing business with us before. So the last bullet is the home test for reconstruction is a form that we would have to approve. And when you have to fill it out, there's a management memo we did a number of years ago that basically rolled out the form and the process and said, look, if it's cheaper to tear down and replace a distressed dwelling than to actually rehabilitate it, then you just need to demonstrate that to us through, your various, your inspection report, your work write-ups. This is the one for repair. This is the one for replace, etc., photographs, etc. And ultimately, we have to agree, yeah, you've convinced us it's cheaper to tear down and replace than repair, or for a mobile home to remove it and trash it and put in a new mobile home. It has to be documented that it's cheaper that way. It comes under cost reasonableness under the final rule. So we have to ultimately defend what we're doing and document what we're doing. Let's roll to the third and final activity we offer, which is tenant-based rental assistance. So this again is rental subsidies that go beyond 30% of the household income. That is to say, the tenant doesn't pay 30% of the rent. No, the tenant pays out 30% of their household income, adjusted income, towards the unit rent plus non-included utilities, and you go off of a little chart that says what their theoretical utilities are beyond whatever utilities might be included in the, let's say, apartment they're renting. And so this is another form of gap assistance, just like down payment assistance. What can they afford? In this case, monthly, just like first-time homebuyer, monthly. But this one is month in, month out. We're going to pay that part of their monthly housing costs, rent and utilities, that's beyond 30% of their income. There is another version of this that lets you them slide up a little bit to 40% and slide down to 10% under certain circumstances. So if you're interested in tenant-based rental assistance, we would like to have the conversation with you to highlight the differences between what we call the certificate model and the voucher model of tenant-based rental assistance. This one on this slide is talking about the certificate model, where they always pay 30% of their adjusted income, unless their income's zero, in which case they would pay maybe a very small $10 a month or whatever you decide to put in your home program TVRA guidelines. So not only can it do monthly rental subsidies, but it can do security deposit assistance for them. And that can be up to 2 times the rent, although there's a California law coming around for assistance, I think, off of tribal trust land that would limit it to, in most cases, just a month of rent for security deposit starting July 1st. So that's a heads up on that. It can also provide a utility deposit assistance with one or both of the others. You could do utility deposit assistance, but you can't do only utility deposit assistance as a standalone for a household. Most of these are simply according to the home final rule. The idea here then is you have to establish a rent standard. And once you do, the rent plus utility allowance can't exceed that rent standard. There's a little exception to that too. If you go the voucher model, then it can to a point, and they pay more than 30% to a point. So it's along those lines. So again, it's beyond the scope of this discussion. Your rent standards, at least off tribal land, we can talk about on tribal land. I'm not navigated to that issue yet. It'll matter a great deal when someone says, we really think we're going to apply, we really need an answer here. Of course, at that point, we just have to figure it out. Anyway, you can set your rent standards at 90 to 110% of HUD's fair market rents that they publish annually. And so the rent standard becomes your kind of basis for your calculations when you're figuring out how much they pay each month, the tenant, to the landlord and or the utility companies, and how much you guys pay to them. And then here's a special rule about tenant-based rental assistance. If you remember earlier, I said that the home income limits are 80% of area median income. But for tenant-based rental assistance, there's a special rule that HUD has, which is at least 90%, so 9 out of 10 households you serve, tenants you serve, must be at or below 60% of area median income. Clearly, they're gearing this program towards lower income people, nobody that's approaching 80%. They do allow you to have at 10% of your households either grow into that next tier from 60 to 80% median income, or even start in that tier, but it's limited to 10% of whom you serve. There's a few other things you have to do if you're running a tenant-based rental assistance program. So I think there's two slides of this. One is you have to document rent reasonableness. So basically, you'd set up a little sheet of comparables, and HUD has a form for this that helps you know kind of what to do. And you're just like you would on a home appraisal if a home's being purchased. It's not nearly as extensive as a professional home appraisal, don't get me wrong, but you have to document pluses or minuses because this one's in a nicer area, this one's got more square footage, this one's in better shape. So you're just getting unassisted comparables in the area, and you're documenting, okay, no matter what our limits are, and they fit in the limits fine, but is the rent that's proposed to be charged on this unit reasonable considering what they're getting? Or could they get basically a better deal easily elsewhere in the area? That's what rent reasonableness documents is. It's actually a reasonable cost for what they're getting. Second, you have to perform a housing quality standards inspection, HQS inspection, and clear the unit, meaning make sure that it's got no deficiencies. We have a form for that. Again, my disclaimer is all of these things are geared towards the traditional model where we're talking to cities and counties only, and there's no exceptions for these things. If someone said, well, we don't have HQS, we don't use HQS, we want to use this, we would certainly explore that and see if it's federally permissible, which is really kind of all that would usually stop us from saying yes to requests for the most part. So plus the requests just have to, not be crazy, and they have to make some sense in the big picture. So you have to perform that or an equivalent kind of inspection and make sure it's clear. Document, we inspected it. Here's the problems. Okay, someone came out and fixed them. Okay, we inspected it again. This unit is now habitable. It's approvable. So you have to do that. You have to also use total net income, not just, that's actually adjusted income, not just gross income for GAAP purposes. So that's subtracting out from their actual monthly, if you will, paycheck pre-taxes, things to give them credit for. It's a senior, it's elderly, it's got childcare, this sort of thing, disability. That, all things equal, would cut down the countable income. So when you're going to say this tenant's going to pay 30% of their income, 30% of adjusted income, which could only be lower than gross income, and therefore it only lowers their share and raises your share, which is good for them. So finally, on this slide, you do have to, if you're going to serve someone more than 12 months, you do have to recertify their income annually, and whenever income changes by more than a certain percentage. I think it's 15%, and that would be expressed in your program guidelines. A little more, your commitments of assistance to tenants cannot exceed 24 months in length, but you can renew with them as many times as you have the funding to be able to honor that commitment. Your the second bullet point points out that you do have to offer a minimum of 12. So minimum 12, maximum 24 is the rule. And you could even get down to as little as a 6-month agreement with the landlord and with the tenant. You have to do both agreements. If for some reason the tenant didn't want 12 plus months, I can't imagine when a tenant would say that, but maybe they're gonna have to head out in 6 months and they really only want a 6-month agreement. So that's no less than 6 months would be acceptable for Home TIBRA. Last but not least, you must execute a lease addendum and a Violence Against Women Act addendum for tenant protections. So just a little extra paperwork that hopefully the landlords wouldn't object to. Let's talk about funding limits. So the minimum and maximum application amount this year is $500,000. Sorry, if an entity for some reason, if one of you wanted to apply and said, for some reason, we don't want that much of a, basically what amounts to, remember, line of credit, because we don't put the money in your bank, right? It's a line of credit. So if it were me, I would want the biggest line of credit I could get, I would think. $500,000. If somebody wanted less for some reason, we could certainly have a conversation, and maybe AB 1010 would come into play at that point. So unlike with the cities and counties, there's potential flexibility there. So now Nikki, do we have any questions? Because I have not kept any kind of an eye on the Q&As. And you're muted if you don't know it.
There's a question in the chat, Jay.
Oh, it's in the chat, not in the Q&As. Okay.
Or no,
Um,
sorry, yeah, it's in the Q&A
okay.
box.
Good. Give me a second. I'm trying to access that. Nikki
It's in the
might be trying
Q&A.
to- Okay.
It's in the Q&A. It's in the
Okay,
Q&A,
very
Jay.
good.
I'll read it for you.
Thank you.
For home funded TVRA, you noted that the TVRA contract with the tenant cannot exceed 24 months, but can be renewed. How long does an awardee have to spend the whole home award?
Great question. So, what you would, if you get awarded and you get your what we call standard agreement, which is basically a contract, but in the state of California, it's called the standard agreement. We would time it out that your contract would have a 3-year expenditure period from the month in which you receive that contract to sign before we countersign it. So basically 36 months to answer your question. So essentially, if you wanted to make 24-month commitments, and if you could somehow manage to hit the ground absolutely running, so you were all kind of ramped up and set up to go by the time you signed your contract, which there's a way to get there, to work between the time of award and the time of contract, which is the best idea, to work on it before you have your contract so you're ready to go. That would give you more or less 12 months in which to enroll people for 24 months of assistance without running out of time. Of course, once you're within, right, 24 months or 23 months of the expenditure deadline, then you've got to stop making 2-year commitments at that point. You might at that point want to start shortening them to, hey, it could be 18 months, it could be 20 months, anywhere between 12 and 24 months. So that's a wonderful question. Let's see. I see a couple more questions. Nikki, do you want to read them?
Sorry, I took my microphone off and I was talking away. Second question in Q&A, for a disabled tribal member that has a stick built that burnt down roughly 2 years ago, would they qualify for a possible rebuild?
So that's a federal rule about not rebuilding. So that's not an AB 1010 issue. The best we could do there would be to submit possibly an exception request, for us to submit an exception request to HUD, but oh boy, that's got just such a long time frame on it. There would be nothing immediate whatsoever because those kind of requests go to HUD Central in Washington, D.C., and they've got such a full plate. So it would be such a huge lift for one household, and it administratively, that's really tough. There's also no guarantee HUD would say okay to that. That would be the only possible avenue that I could think of, is asking HUD for a waiver to their regulations. Mary, go ahead, please.
Yeah, what about the home projects funding? Because I remember that there's a disaster recovery component to the home projects.
There are funds that are sort of, there's a targeted amount of funds that have to do with the flooding disaster. That was flooding disasters from roughly 1 year ago, I think, is the restrictions to that. Nikki, I think you could speak to this better than myself, but that's my recollection. And I don't believe there's any kind of waiver that would deal with that, but I'm not sure. So Nikki, are you able to speak to that idea?
Well, I'd like to unpack the question just a little bit.
Sure. It's a big...
Because it may be possible, because we are dealing with a tribal applicant, to request an exception of the 12-month commitment of funds to do an owner-occupied rehabilitation or a reconstruction of a burnt down home. But we would have to, home would have to put forth a request for a waiver of a restriction that is a federal requirement. And then we would have to wait for HUD to give us an approval or disapprove our request for waiver. But if in fact you were operating a program and someone had a stick-built home that burnt down, as long as we can commit funds to reconstruct it within 12 months of destruction, we would be able to, or the tribe would be able to assist. This one just happened in the past. And so in the past, it might be a difficulty to treat them like an owner-occupied rehab reconstruction, but they could qualify as a first-time home buyer.
Right, there is
answer
an
Mary's-
exception. Mhm.
And to answer Mary's question about the disaster waiver that is applicable to this NOFA, it is the straight line winds and flooding disaster. And it is restricted to the communities that were published in the notice of the disaster declaration. So it would depend on where the project was located, and then the destruction would have, destruction or damage would have to be associated with damage from straight line winds or flood.
Yeah, because one of the waivers I remember HUD offered was, for example, waiving the subsidy limits for such a property that was damaged in the target areas under that. And tell me if you disagree, Nikki, but I think that was one of the ones that really caught my attention, was a rare
No,
exception to their subsidy limits.
Yes, that is correct. There are
Yeah.
certain waivers that we can apply in those disaster areas that other state recipients would not have the benefit to utilize. Excuse
Okay.
me.
So
The
that's,
next question,
yeah.
shall we go on to the next question, or there needs to be more discussion about this?
No, I think if somebody wants to explore that with us, we can do that, offline. But we need to keep this going, but we're happy to, I'll reiterate, if I didn't say it up front, I think we said it, or we say it at the end. Our technical assistance, we are very interested to engage with you, everybody on this call, and the tribal community and our cities and counties, but especially you, being new to our program, as much as you're interested to engage with us. So we're just here, we're friendly, we're available and interested to spend time with you to better understand your questions, your needs, your concerns. And sometimes we just kind of have to work back and forth together. It could be on a Teams call. It could involve sharing, screens, or look at this and what have you. Our job is to kind of roll up our sleeves and work with each other and with our constituents to try to find a yes, not a no, try to work things out. So go ahead, Nikki.
Okay, next question. What is the maximum an applicant can apply for?
Right.
So I
So-
want to, Jay, answer this in two ways. What is the maximum an applicant, like a state recipient, tribal member can apply for, and the maximum a beneficiary may be
Gotcha.
able to apply for?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for, that's right. It could be interpreted two different ways. The maximum a home NOFA applicant, which is never a household, it's always a unit of government or a tribal entity or a developer, in some cases on the project side. The maximum for this solicitation for program activities is 500,000. Okay. The maximum, if you mean an applicant to your program, if you're awarded and you get a standard agreement with us, you could set maximums and say, so I'm really glad you brought this up. You could say essentially, with, maybe you don't say 100% of this, but maybe the idea is, look, we have a lot of demand. We want to spread the money around. We're not going to take on any owner-occupied rehabs that would require more than $50,000 of assistance, because that's kind of putting too many eggs in one basket, if as it were. And, you know, to the extent we fund a huge project for this household, that then we're excluding those last two households who had lesser projects. So there's always, when you're reviewing your program guidelines as part of your setup, and we'll get into that later, you'll have some strategic decisions to make about whether to put in restrictions that we and HUD don't put on you. So you could say, okay, I know the subsidy limits are 300,000 for a 3-bedroom, so to speak. We're going to actually limit our assistance for a first-time home buyer to 100,000, and on an owner-occupied rehab to 50,000. So that's completely, you know, up to you. So the maximums are what you make it, unless somebody's trying to apply for a bigger rehab, and they don't really put a dollar amount on their requests. They just say, we need help with down payment assistance, and you're the ones to determine their gap, not the primary lender. You do, because you have to make it fit within the debt ratios for a home buyer. For owner-occupied rehab, you have to determine what their needs are and what's covered under the program, right? And it just adds up to whatever it adds up to, and that's fine. If you want to put sublimits to control and spread out the money, you can. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Jay. And then this is a piggyback on the question, I believe, about the home that was burnt down. And it says they are currently housed in a modular housing that is poorly equipment. I'm assuming that is just, it's in pretty bad shape. Could a better unit be provided with this funding? Or maybe can we discuss offline as well about waivers or other options? It is not from a national disaster, as far as I know, a natural disaster.
Yeah, so even that burned down house might not be part of a natural disaster like a forest fire. Things happen. I used to be a homeowner's claims adjuster. Sometimes there's things that go wrong with electrical or candles and such. So I get that. And so not knowing if it's related to the burned down house, I will say this, that if someone's in a modular, any kind of housing, whether it's manufactured, modular, or stick built, and it's got deficiencies, you say currently housed in there, I'm assuming for the moment they own it and they're not a renter. If they're a renter, we can't fix it up unless the owner applies for an well, that's not owner occupied. So why don't we have a talk offline, Ryan? Just email Home NOFA. You'll see this at the end of the slideshow at hcd.ca.gov, and just say, hey, I'd like to, you know, discuss my question from the webinar, and because it doesn't do us much good to guess. We need, you know, pretty much all of the relevant details to give you a helpful answer. But we love going over scenarios with folks.
But I would like to take a step back here.
Sure.
If you have a current owner occupied modular housing unit that is poorly equipped or in badly need of repair, that qualifies for an owner occupied rehabilitation. And so you would be able to assist that beneficiary, that tribal member that owns that manufactured home with owner occupied rehab.
Or even modular home, yeah. That's the whole
Okay.
idea of owner-occupied rehab. I still suspect we're missing a little part of the story because of the mention of it's not from a natural disaster. So
Yeah.
I'd love to find out more.
I just wanted to expand it for others listening on the call so that they understood that every scenario would not have to be, you know, talked about offline, that there are circumstances that occur often where you have a modular housing or a mobile home or a trailer that is owner occupied and it's on, you know, their owner's land, and they could qualify for an owner occupied rehab.
Right. One more question just flowed in, Nikki.
Okay. Then the last question is, can an application consist of multiple activities as long as they are allowable activities?
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought this up because I will tell you that what you're going to see if you apply in eCivis is there's going to be what's called a main application where you put in just kind of your overview stuff as to who, you know, who's applying, what your address is, etc. and even what activities you're going to give us sub-applications for. And then connected to that electronically in eCivis is what we call subordinate, so sub-applications. And that's where you're going to do one of those for each of the subordinate activities. So yes, you can apply for 1, 2, or all 3 of these program activities. And the NOFA even talks about how you can apply for, conceivably, let's say you're a federally recognized tribe, and you formed a special purpose entity, and you could apply for a rental new construction project, and then also apply for a home program activities thing with 1, 2, or all 3 activities in that application. So the NOFA delineates the combinations that are possible. So Nikki, I think we've gotten to the break time at long last so that people can take care of their needs.
Okay, it's 2:41. Let's take a 10-minute break. So we'll see you back here at 2:51.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, hopefully on time. So the program requirements part 2 now. So we're going to talk about use of funds, forms of assistance, underwriting, and property standards. Those last 2 are a little dry, I'm sorry, but we do have to cover them. So let's talk about eligible uses of funds in the first-time homebuyer realm. So when you assist a household, you can collect, it costs some time or money for you to do what you need to do: income determination, inspect the house, draw up documents for escrow, lots of things, do your underwriting and determination. So we offer up to 6.5% as a maximum of the total acquisition costs. Sorry, that one with AC and Rehab was supposed to be removed. That should say for acquisition only, not AC and Rehab. So up to 6.5%. So for every $100,000 you loan out, you have up to $6,500 available to cover your time and expense, whether you did it in-house or outsourced it. That's based on the full load employee cost of the people working on it, so hourly plus benefits. And it would have to be documented and either submitted, depending, upfront or eventually shown to us or to HUD to support the drawing the activity delivery cost. ADC stands for activity delivery cost, and that's a nickname for what HUD calls project-related soft costs. So again, in the first-time homebuyer realm, that would be your cost to administer that project that actually succeeded and worked out. If you work on one that doesn't work out, you can't collect project-related soft costs. You would pay for that with your home general administrative funds instead. So up to 6.5%. If you're doing infill new construction, it's 6.5% of a different number. It's not the assistance to the borrower at that point. It's the total development costs to do the infill new construction. Acquisition of the land and building the home and that sort of thing. This is a reminder on the 3rd bullet point that in first-time home buyer, there has to be a 30-year fixed first mortgage. And I think we touched on this earlier. And you are secondary financing. You could be the 2nd or 3rd mortgage with no payments for our requirements. So they must obtain financing from a primary lender in addition to the home financing. And I will add, they must get a impound accounts on the mortgage so that taxes and insurance are included in their monthly payment to make sure that they don't let either of those lapse. For owner-occupied rehabilitation, the project-related soft cost maximum is 24% of the loan and grant amount to the borrower. Okay, and again, you have to document your costs. It's not that you automatically get 24% on top of what you loaned and granted. It's that would represent a ceiling of the most that you could claim on your project setup and completion report for your internal costs to carry out that project. For tenant-based rental assistance, the maximum is 5% per household served, and that per HUD's home program final rule. It's only for the time you spent on income certification and unit inspections, time and expense, I should say, not for all the other time that you obviously have to spend to help a tenant get into assisted housing, and in fact, cut checks once a month to the landlord, for et cetera, right? And so it's 5% there. Here's some ineligible use of funds. Oh, on that last slide, I'm sorry. Beyond what's available for project-related soft cost or ADC for tenant-based rental assistance, you might ask, well, how am I going to pay for all that time that we or our housing authority is going to spend working on this? And the answer would be, well, you can spend general admin funds on both successful and unsuccessful household assistance projects. So that's where the money would come from. Here's some uses that you can't do with home funds. You cannot refinance existing debt. It's not for that purpose. You can't pay for expenses that are incurred after your final expenditure deadline. So again, we give you 3 years to expend the funds once you have the contract for signature in your possession. And so if you incur expenses after the expenditure deadline, well, by definition, you missed the deadline and we can't reimburse you for those projects. You also can't pay delinquent property taxes or lapsed insurance policies with home funds. And finally, you can't pay for expenses incurred prior to the execution of your home standard agreement, except for NEPA, which is, we'll get into that, federal environmental, unless we give you written pre-approval to incur expenses early. For example, let's say you get your an award from the NOFA application, notification of an award in May, and maybe you're not going to get your contract till August, and you want to do some work to ramp up your program just in advance, right at the beginning. Okay, we've got our award, we want to incur costs early. We would do this, that, and the other with it, marketing, what have you, and we would give you written permission. Yes, you may. So keep that in mind, please. And I think we sort of invite that of our awardees to kind of prompt them to do that. Most do. Forms of assistance with home funds. So per the state of California regulations, and therefore this is, if I don't think this is in the state statute, so therefore I think this is subject to AB 1010 adjustment, but home loans could be at 0 to 3% simple interest by the state home regs. That's the rule in the state home regs. Simple interest means it's not compounding interest, and you could vary that, make it different for seniors or for disabled people or for lower income, lower AMI households. Most don't. Most just put 0 or 3 or something in between and keep it really simple and universal for everybody, but you wouldn't have to. You could also say you will forgive the interest if they stay in the home at least 10 years or what have you. And also the loans have to be deferred according to the state home regs. So that's negotiable too, using AB 1010, I would say. But I think these are good best practices, so I'm not sure you'd want to do anything different here. So deferred payments means there's no payment for the life of the loan. That's the state home rule. It's not a federal rule. Let's talk about now home grants. So let me define the term grants. When you're filling out an application for this NOFA, if you want to apply, that's often referred to as grant writing. That's not what I mean by grants here. I mean grants as opposed to loans, and I mean here's money that you give to the households, you don't loan it to the households. And this is the rules for tenant-based rental assistance. You don't loan them the money, you give them the money, just like Section 8, just like probably NAHASDA. You give money for relocation, whether voluntary or involuntary. There's a lot of good ways to avoid involuntary relocation. You give money for lead-based paint hazard evaluation and reduction. You don't loan that. The borrower doesn't have to pay that back. And then there's a special case in our owner-occupied rehab program. We created something roughly back in 2010 when I was here just, I think, 3 years, that allowed for the first time for us to assist a household who didn't have enough equity in their home to be able to give them a home loan without taking them over 100%. So the old rule said you can't take them over 100, so I guess this project's not going to work out. The new rule says if they have any equity, you're going to loan against that equity in the home. But beyond that available equity, now that they're 100% financed, so you're going to grant them the rest of the money. Give you an example. A home's worth $200,000 now, and after you rehab it, it's going to be worth $250,000. Let's say they have currently $150,000 mortgage. Okay, so that means they will have $100,000 of equity to work with that you could loan against. Presumably their rehab doesn't cost 100, so that's going to be 100% you're loaning them the money. You don't need to give them any because you're not making them over encumbered. You're not making them what some people call upside down in the home. They would still have some equity left in it. We see a number of these from our grantees. And so a different example is the home's worth $250 and they owe $225 on it. The home's going to be worth $275 after rehab, but it needs quite a bit of rehab, more than $50,000. So you loan them that first $50,000, and so now they've got the first mortgage and the second mortgage, and that's equal to the value of the new home. But they need more rehab funds than that. So you have to give them the rest of the money to be able to do the rehab. So the maximum amount you could grant them, is 25% of the home per unit subsidy limit. I think I have on my slide, I think I put in, did I? What the current subsidy limits are. I guess I didn't. The homes per unit subsidy limits range according to how many bedrooms there are, but let's say it's around 300,000 on a typical one. Then 25% of 300,000 is 75,000. So you could give them, if needed, only if needed, as much of $75,000 worth of repairs beyond what you'd have to loan them. So that's how that works. It can even help people who will already owe more money on their first mortgage than the home's going to be worth after you rehab it. In that case, you don't loan them any, you just give them money, rehab grant, as long as it doesn't exceed, in our example, $75,000, 25% of the $300,000 subsidy limit. So I know that's a lot of words. That's just meant to give you a very primary understanding of the power of being able to help people who kind of have big mortgages already, and you can't loan them over 100%. You do need our advance written approval before you ever commit funds to a homeowner in that situation. We have a management memo on our website, one for that reconstruction process where you prove it's cheaper to tear down and replace than to repair. And we have a different one for this situation where they don't have enough equity to loan against on a rehab. And so you want to grant them money. So this form helps do the math. And the management memo tells you what we need to review before we approve that. So moving on to underwriting standards. So let me see if I skipped any home grants. Yeah, that was home grants. Underwriting standards. So we have first-time home buyer infill new construction. And again, it doesn't get applied for much, but we'll whiz through these. Underwriting analysis must include reasonableness of profit or return to the developer, project cost reasonableness, market analysis, experience and financial capacity, and firm financial commitments in place to fully fund the project. So you can't just do something where, oh, we're going to apply for this and maybe we'll figure out a way to be able to build it, and including getting the land, however we got the land, and selling it and not losing money on it. So we're not going to let anybody apply or award anybody who didn't prove that they've got a feasible program that end up costing them money because that would make no sense. And we don't provide a development subsidy for the difference between what it costs to fill in that gap within the community and what that home could ultimately sell for. And at the end of the day, it's got to make sense. For acquisition only, that's exempt from market and developer capacity analysis. These slides aren't very helpful, I'll admit, but basically there's nothing to do up front. On infill new construction, back to that slide, there's a lot of things that you would find in the eCitus application. Those would be some of the hardest forms to fill out. On break, I knew I wanted to tell you this, and I had a discussion with Mary yesterday along the lines of, you wouldn't believe how much easier and quicker it is to fill out a home program activities application than it is a home projects application, like for a rental project. So please don't think that this would be a difficult or onerous process to apply for our funds in eCivis. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that we kind of go out of our way to try to make it user-friendly and as short and sweet as possible. So it shouldn't chew up tons and tons of anybody's hours to plow through that, especially when we're here to help you navigate that and answer all your questions. We could do that over Microsoft Teams in a meeting where you're sharing your screen and showing us, and we say, oh yeah, click there, skip that, whatever. So you have to demonstrate cost reasonableness for first-time home buyer on each project eventually, not at the time of application, mind you. Aqua Rehab is no longer allowable, so I should have deleted this slide. And owner-occupied rehab and TBRA are exempt from these underwriting requirements. So that was just getting into a little bit of the federal regs on underwriting, the home final rule. Property standards. I told you these parts would be a little dry, so I apologize, but we wanted to inform you. For new construction, it has to meet, okay, for cities and counties, I would say for sure, it has to meet all state and local codes, ordinances, zoning on non-trust land. So if you're doing a program activity and it's and your part of your service area you've chosen is in neighboring cities or counties area of non-trust land, in other words, then there's no way around HUD's requirement that it meets all state and local codes and such. If it's on tribal trust land, I think we need to have a conversation and see what you've got and if and how that fits with the federal home rule, keeping in mind that we can't do anything with AB 1010 about federal home regulations. For rehab, you have to establish rehab standards. Essentially, that would look like what kind of roofing would we give people who need a new roof? Maybe it's 30-year dimensional composition shingles, etc. So you're kind of calling out the standards. For windows, we're going to use dual pane, low E squared windows, vinyl, or fiberglass, or this, I can't remember the other material that's getting quite popular, but it's good to have like a standardized, and it's necessary to have rehab standards so that you automatically apply that kind of fix to the common problems, and people aren't getting what could be perceived as preferential treatment or differential treatment. So that's the importance of rehab standards. It's just for fairness and equity. Let's talk a minute about major systems. There's something in the home final rule that cannot get waived, and it essentially says any major systems, and I'll tell you in a second what that means, have to have at least, like the third bullet point says, at least a remaining useful life of at least 5 years. So if you're doing an owner-occupied rehab, you don't get to ignore or overlook the air conditioner or heating and air that clearly doesn't have 5 years left, or the roof that clearly doesn't. So the major systems by HUD's own definition are structural support, roofing, windows, doors, siding, gutters, plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. So that's not a shocking list. I see why they call those major systems. So each of those things I just mentioned, you have to, when you do your inspection, say this is okay, meaning it has at least 5 years left, so we don't have to touch it. Okay, So keep that in mind for rehab. That's what you're essentially getting yourself into if you run a rehab program. For down payment assistance, the property standards are it has to meet health and safety and local code compliance on non-trust land at least. So again, we can talk about how that might look on trust land. That's just a conversation basically for another day when A, you're considering applying, or B, you have applied and you get awarded, and then we just collectively must figure that out. And we can do that. For tenant-based rental assistance, it must meet housing quality standards using the HUD checklist. I think we already talked about that. Sorry for the duplication. For manufactured housing, AKA mobile homes is another way people say it. HUD kind of changed the definition, but you know what they are. They have their own chassis and this sort of thing, and they're built off-site and brought in. So for reconstructions, again, that's throwing out the old one when it's cheaper to just throw it out and replace with a new one. That requires a permanent foundation and utility hookups. For a rehab of one of those manufactured homes, it requires that foundation and anchoring to meet state and local codes. Again, we could talk about how that looks on tribal lands. We're not there yet. It matters more when we have a very interested applicant or an awardee. Thirdly, the lease period must be at least equal to the affordability period for purchases. So there's this thing called a home affordability period for first-time home buyer only. Affordability periods do not apply to rehab, just down payment assistance. And it's going to be a term of 5, 10, or 15 years, depending on your assistance amount. 40,000 plus of assistance is 15 years. This is saying that the lease period, so let's say it's a space rent lease for a manufacturer that's owned, but they're renting in a mobile home park. I don't know if we would see where they could get a lease for 15 years. Maybe this is why I don't think we've seen manufactured homes come in for anything other than owner-occupied rehab. I don't think I've seen one for first-time home buyer. Now let's talk about something quite important. It's the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA for short. It's found at 24 CFR Part 58. If you were to Google 24 CFR Part 58, you would see the one I'd want you to go after is called ECFR, Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, and you could read through them if you chose to. That's what we're all subject to in the home program as a state and as state recipients. And so the act itself is a statute, but the regulations to support the act and tell us how to deal with that act, that statute, is at 24 CFR Part 58. So that slide doesn't quite say it right. Essentially the idea is that no funds may be committed to a home activity or project before the completion of the environmental review for that project. So what does that look like? Oh, okay, I didn't put the slide in here. Basically what that means is for first-time home buyer and tenant-based rental assistance, it's a really kind of a minimalist form that HUD has on their environmental webpage. And so there's like basically 3 questions. One of them's floodplains. One of them's port noise, or airport hazards. And one of them's, I think, coastal zones. And so you just deal with those 3 on those 2 activities. And you do even a programmatic sheet on general admin. Where it gets more difficult is if you're doing owner-occupied rehabilitation, then that rises to a higher level of NEPA accountability. And so 24 CFR Part 58 basically says that's called categorically excluded, subject to the statutes. The others are not subject to the statutes. These rehab is subject to the statutes for single family rehab. That forces you to fill out their longer, harder form, known as a CEST, stands for category excluded, subject to. And there you have to address quite a few factors, and they're all over the map. Contamination and noise in general, and lots of other things, wetlands. et cetera, explosives and flammables, et cetera. So the worksheet would kind of walk you through it. And what's nice is HUD has put a lot of resources on their environmental page to give you technical assistance, self-service technical assistance about how to address each one of those factors on the form to say basically no impact, or this isn't applicable to a single family rehab or what have you. And we actually have a great kind of cheat sheet for our grantees to be able to get through that more quickly with semi-canned answers, as it were, from our environmental specialists to really get you halfway there. But there's still going to be questions. There still has to be inspection and questions answered, particular to that property with that rehab. And at the end of the day, your NEPA certifying officer has to sign off and say, yes, this project is no impact. So now we've completed this. What I need to tell you is, because of how many deficiencies we saw during closeout monitoring, which means auditing, going into offices back, this goes back 10 plus years, we saw too many problems. So we thought, you know what? They don't get it. They're not doing it right. So we made a new rule, and it's in your contract if you get one, that says we have to approve your environmental review paperwork on each and every owner-occupied rehab project before you can commit funds to that particular household. So the good news is that keeps you from making what's known as a choice limiting action and the potential for having to give the money back or such. So we just help you up front to make sure you did it right, and then HUD's happy, and if HUD's happy, everybody's happy. So it's time for any questions that will roll in. I think I saw no questions have rolled in since our last recap, so I feel like I should just keep going unless somebody wants to raise an objection to that. Okay, hearing nothing, I'll keep going. Let me take a sip of water. Okay, now we're getting towards the home stretch, everybody. So we're going to get out a little earlier than advertised. So application review. So there are things in the state home regulations called minimum requirements. And since they're in the state home regulations, if these are things you wouldn't find in the home final rule, or if these are things that you don't find in the state statutes, then AB 1010 could potentially eliminate these as threshold items for you. So notice I keep trying to remind you of the potential power of AB 1010. And so in general, application has to be received by the NOFA deadline. So eCivis will actually shut off your ability to submit applications after May 9th. So you want to get them in or try early, and then it would tell you, oops, you can't submit yet. You didn't fill out this required field. So make sure you stay on top of that. You have to be an eligible applicant. So if you're a non-federally recognized tribe trying to apply for program activities, you would not be an eligible applicant. Neither would a developer. Neither would there's other certain applicants that might come to us and they can't for this type of home application, and we would not be able to go further with the application. It has to be obviously for an eligible activity. I named the 3 activities we do. The application forms will keep you in bounds on that. It also has to be an eligible use of funds. Back to eligible activity, I should touch on this. If you say, we want to run a tenant-based rental assistance program in San Francisco, or to include San Francisco, then we'd say that's not eligible because that's not a state home eligible area, and so forth. So it has to be proposed to be in state home eligible areas as expressed on NOFA Appendix A, plus tribal lands, to put it generally. Okay, eligible use of funds, that's again, eCivis will keep you in bounds, and your application has to be complete. eCivis will mark things mandatory so that you can't not complete necessary parts. You must have no unresolved audit findings, and that's according to some wording in the state home regulations. I can't see where that would be an issue for most, if any. You have to be compliant with the submittal requirements of, here's another federal thing that we can't change, 2 CFR Section 200, single audit reporting. So if you, as a federally recognized tribe, are, I think, subject to this requirement, then you need to upload the single audit to us or upload evidence that you reported to the Federal Clearinghouse, not the State Controller's Office, sorry about that, that you aren't responsible for submitting a single audit. Why? Because you spent less than 750,000, which is the threshold of federal funds from all federal fund sources, not just home, not just housing, in that last fiscal year, fiscal 22-23 in this case. So those are due on March 31st, by the way. So if you spent 750 plus and you haven't done that, and if you're going to apply for that program, please be sure to take care of that. If you're exempt, make sure you send them an exemption letter by that date. And either way, you'll be uploading something to us to show us what you did and that you did it on time. You can't be on the federal list of debarred contractors. I've never seen anybody fail on that basis in my world of program activities. Also, the amount of funds requested must be between the minimum and maximum, 500,000. Again, we can talk about it if for some reason somebody wants to somehow apply for less. 500,000 will be the most. And the application forms cannot have been modified. So there's a little bit in the eCivis where you download a form and fill it out and upload it. And if you change our form and it's not the form that we really gave you, that would potentially be a disqualifier. I don't think I've ever seen anybody try to modify our forms though. So the last part, rating and ranking. So my comment is, if and only if we are oversubscribed, I would say not only in the tribal realm, because you have a carve out of 20, you have first dibs on 20% of our 40% of the big pot of money. If it's undersubscribed in the tribal realm, your points won't matter. If it is oversubscribed in the tribal realm somehow, which would take probably, what's the math, 14 plus applications to come from tribal entities, then and if there's no leftover money from the state side, that would sort of shock me, then it could come down to points. I'm saying I really don't think these points are going to play out or matter, but I still have to talk about them. So don't let it stress you out. The most people could score is 950, and unlike in projects, rental projects and subdivisions, we don't have a minimum score requirement. So no matter how few points you would score, that's not a eligibility factor in programs. This is just if it becomes competitive, naturally we have to rate and rank the applications and see, and possibly say no to the lowest 1 or 2 scorers, for example. That hasn't happened in our realm in over 5 years. We haven't been oversubscribed in programs. So, and this is a double NOFA, so the pot of money is pretty rich. So I feel good about everybody's chances. So local housing element, but that's not applicable for tribes. So you would get the full points, 50, unlike cities and counties automatically. Rural community. So if you're locating something outside of tribal lands, and you fill out the worksheet and they're proven to be by the numbers, census data, a rural community, you get 50 points. If it's strictly on tribal land, I'm going to assume for the moment you get 50 points. It's hard to believe you wouldn't. So I suspect you're going to get 50 points. You just have a little paperwork to do if you're operating off of tribal land, because we do have forms set up for all the census areas. The third factor for 100 points is applicant experience, and this is, read it carefully. This has to do with you listing your experience administering home and/or other qualified affordable housing or community development programs over the last 7 years. So if you handled money from any kind of grantor like us, or HUD, or anything like that, and you've done something the same as what you're applying for, that's worth, but all things equal, more points. So if you're applying for first-time home buyer and you've been running some sort of first-time home buyer program, you're putting down your first-time home buyer program experience. Doesn't matter if it wasn't with home funds. We don't care. We care that you have experience in carrying out that type of activity with whatever form of funding that you used and wherever you got it from. Similarly, if you're applying for first-time homebuyer, just as an example, it's going to say now, what other experience do you have running housing or community development programs or projects that don't look like first-time homebuyers? So you say, oh, well, we had this rental assistance program this year and this year and this year. That would count as other experience, different from that particular thing you're applying for. So I hope that makes sense. So you'll have an opportunity to get credit for same and what we call different experience for each and every home program activity that you decide to apply for. And the most points anybody could get is 100. The least is 0, but that's okay because, again, not thinking points are going to matter. Prior performance is a factor. So your community hasn't been subject to giving us reports, so you're going to get the full points because this is where everybody starts out with 50 points, and we deduct points from state recipients who've had home reporting responsibilities and didn't do it perfectly. If they're later missing, we deduct points, and they can go down from 50 to as little as 0 based on their deficiencies. You can't go down. You get 50 points. Community need. This gets a little tricky. So if you're going to serve areas outside of tribal trust land and such, then we have an Appendix C that's currently on our Home NOFA page that shows what the scores would be. And this doesn't require you to look them up or know them in advance. To me, it is what it is. We would score up the points to the extent we could based on the community need, based on the various charts. It's like an Excel workbook with different tabs. So we use that to determine your community need score. The most anybody could get is 250 if they had the most needy need determined by prices and vacancy and all kinds of factors that the census reveals. If it's on tribal trust land, honestly, and if the points come into play, we'd have to figure that out. I don't have an answer for you today, but again, I doubt the points are going to matter this time around. Project feasibility. So for first-time home buyer, we're going to say, okay, how many, you say you're going to do, 5 homes with this $500,000 and your target sales price is $200,000. Okay, how many homes sold at or below $200,000 in the last months in your service area? And if you say, well, we're trying to do 5 and only, 5 sold last year, that starts to look like trying to capture most of the market with your program, and that's not going to happen. So that you're not going to get very many feasibility points if you don't have a healthy ratio between how many units you're proposing to do in your 3 years and how many units actually sold in the last 12 months below that particular price in your calculation worksheet. So make sure there's a healthy ratio. That's my tip to you. And if it's a nice and healthy ratio, you try to capture 10% of the market, I see you getting the 75 points there. This goes back to our community needs score chart. So if you apply for it, we score it up for you. And again, we'd have to figure out how it looks on tribal trust lands for score. This one, it's funny and it's simple. I'll tell you now that back when we used to make people actually submit to us with their application. This is when applications were much, much harder. You had to submit a proposed set of home program guidelines for each activity that you were applying for. And then we poor reps at the time had to go through them and look to make sure it hit all the points it needed to hit. And that was exhausting and time consuming. So we came to our senses at one point about 10 years ago and said, no, we're going to lock down the guidelines. Everybody has to start with this best practices set. They're in Word. They're locked into track changes. Go to town on them. Fill in the mandatory stuff like the name of your jurisdiction in the header and then the cover page, etc. But and then make any other proposed changes you want. They'll automatically be shown as track changes, markup, right? Then you submit them to us. We look at them and we say, okay, you can make all these or most of these changes. And at some point, we approve your program guidelines as part of the upfront ramp up setup process. What we've done is we took away that hard lift for you and for us at application time. And we said, hey, just check this box that says, yes, we understand. We have to start out with your best practices guidelines. And you check the box and you get your 25 points. If you fail to submit the form, you don't get your 25 points. And we'll make that a mandatory upload. So you'll get your 25 points. Expenditure rates. So this doesn't really apply to you, but if you had been with us in the last 3-4 NOPA cycles and you'd spent really well, you could get bonus points for that. But you haven't had contracts with us, so I'm not positive. Well, most don't get these points, so probably this is really reserved for those who've been with us and spent well. So I think that'd be 0 points for you and almost every single city and county we deal with, by the way. And then there's something about access to opportunities. So how this looks on the form you're going to fill out is essentially this. If you apply for tenant-based rental assistance, you're going to get 110 points because that's the only way to, well, they've changed the standards a little this year. So I'm sorry, this slide's a little outdated. It has to do with homelessness, and TBRA is our only of our 3 things we talked about that could be kind of an instant cure for homelessness. Owner-occupied rehab certainly doesn't cure anybody's homelessness. And down payment assistance, a homeless person's not going to be able to get a first mortgage in general. And so home ownership is likely not the answer. So that's the end of the points. That's all the point scoring factors. And so now it's time to turn to the last questions and then we'll be done. So Nikki, would you like to do what you do and read that out loud?
Yeah, so we do have one question in our question and answers, and if you have a burning question, feel free to fill it in while we go through this question. But the question is, where in the regulations can I find it stating that a tribal member will have to wait 20 to 25 years before they can inherit the property without income qualifications? Please advise. This was a specific question from a superior. So I think what they're talking about is the period of affordability. Because during the period of affordability, any beneficiary that occupies the home must be income qualified. But the maximum affordability period in our program is 15 years. So it sounds like there's some misinformation running around out there. And it wouldn't have, and so we could further clarify and answer this question with more information. But I do want to make it clear that our maximum period of affordability, regardless of the program activity, is 15 years. And that's a first-time home buyer restriction of affordability. There is no affordability period for owner-occupied rehab. And this question would apply to a tenant-based rental assistance unit. So I'm assuming it's somebody that may have gotten down payment assistance. Now, if there are other funds of down payment assistance that have layered with our home dollars, they could have a different period of affordability, and you would be held to whatever the rules of that program are. But for home specifically, the maximum is 15 years, and the tribe wouldn't necessarily have to wait to inherit. They would just have to either pay back the funds when they inherit so that they could occupy. Because in order to meet our period of affordability with HUD, our beneficiary must be income qualified for the full period of affordability. In the event that happens, that there has to be a payback of funds because the beneficiary passes away and the household member that inherits the property is over income, that means we haven't met the period of affordability on this particular unit, and that would require a payback of the funds to the department, and the department would have to repay those funds to HUD. So we don't run across this very often, even with our state recipients. Typically, there's somebody in the household that would remain in the household that would inherit.
Yeah, so go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, a couple more things that I wanted to talk about before we leave this presentation is that we want to meet with you. We want to talk about your plans to operate a program or to do owner-occupied rehab for your members or to do tenant-based rental assistance for your members. We have lots of ideas to help transition our tribal partners into the space. And so we encourage you to contact the home email and schedule a technical assistance session with us so that we can assist you not only to figure out how to design your program and set it up so that it works for you, but also the application if necessary. And the other thing is, if you're interested in if you're interested in first-time home buyer, we do have a mandatory first-time home buyer webinar that we're presenting tomorrow afternoon that will go over some new policies for resale and recapture of units that are assisted with home dollars. You're welcome to register for that webinar. The link to register is on our HCD website. If you go to the HCD website and go to grants currently with
Programs
funding,
active.
yeah, programs active, and select the home program and select the NOFA tab on that splash sheet, you will see a list of webinars that you can register for. This one is on that list. And just scroll down to the bottom to the mandatory first-time homebuyer workshop. It is not designed tribally specific, but the policy will apply or may potentially apply to tribes. So I want to let you know. We will also have that webinar posted and a recording of that webinar posted on our website a few days after the webinar occurs. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to spend with us today. We look really forward to hearing from you. Please submit your inquiries via email to the home program. And Jay has graciously also provided to you his email address. So you have some ways to reach out to us, and we look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to now stop the recording on this session since there's no more questions in the question and answer box. And thank you for your time.